The morning sun burned copper over forward operating base Sentinel as Corporal Iris Thorne circled her MRAP for the third time, checking every bolt, every tire, every panel with methodical precision. The convoy vehicle hulked before her like a sleeping beast, armored and imposing. Yet she knew its vulnerabilities better than most knew their own names. She ran her palm along the driver's side door, feeling for the slight give that would indicate a loose hinge. Everything solid, everything ready. Behind her, voices carried across the motor pool with that particular edge of masculine mockery she'd learned to tune out over 3 years of service. Sergeant Klaus Brennan led the chorus, his voice thick with the kind of condescension that came easy to infantry soldiers when addressing anyone who didn't carry a rifle as their primary weapon. "You know what the difference is between a driver and a real soldier," Brennan announced to his gathered squad. "A real soldier faces the enemy. A driver just faces traffic." Laughter rippled through the group, that pack mentality Iris had witnessed countless times before. She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the performance. Instead, she crouched to inspect the undercarriage, her keen eyes scanning for anything out of place, any sign of tampering or where that could spell disaster on hostile roads. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar situations where someone was underestimated in your community. The motor pool bustled with pre-mission activity as other drivers prepped their vehicles, while combat soldiers checked weapons and gear with the swagger of men who believed their role elevated them above support personnel. Iris understood the hierarchy, even if she didn't respect it. In the Army's eyes, driving supplies through contested territory ranked somewhere below cooking and above absolutely nothing. Never mind that without drivers, those combat soldiers would have no ammunition, no food, no medical supplies. Never mind that convoy routes through hostile valleys required nerves of steel and reflexes most trigger pullers would never possess. Lieutenant Vance Holloway emerged from the operations building, his fresh deployment tin barely settled in, making him look younger than his 24 years. He carried himself with the rigid posture of someone who studied leadership from manuals rather than experience. His eyes swept across the motor pool, cataloging personnel and vehicles with bureaucratic efficiency. "Thorne," he called out, his voice carrying that flat quality of someone addressing subordinates he considered interchangeable. "Your truck ready for the supply run?" "Yes, sir," Iris replied, straightening from her crouch. "Full diagnostic completed. She's solid." Holloway's gaze lingered on her for a moment, that particular look she'd seen too many times. The one that questioned why a woman would volunteer for forward deployment, why she'd choose convoy duty in one of the most dangerous valleys in the region. She met his stare with steady calm, her gray eyes revealing nothing of the calculus running beneath. She'd learned long ago that explanations only invited more questions, more doubt, more scrutiny of choices that were hers alone to make. The lieutenant moved on without further comment, joining Brennan's squad near the armory. Iris watched them gather around Corporal Rex Hartwell, the platoon's designated marksman, who held court like some prophet of precision fire. He gestured with his rifle, explaining something about wind calculation to soldiers who nodded with reverent attention. Hartwell wore his skill like a crown, and perhaps he'd earned that right. His confirmed kills numbered in the double digits, his reputation solid among the combat troops. Iris turned back to her vehicle, running through mental checklists her father had drilled into her since childhood. Check your six. Trust your gut. Notice what others miss. The words echoed in her memory with Gunnery Sergeant Wade Thorne's gravelly voice, though she'd learned to keep those lessons buried beneath layers of careful anonymity. Specialist Zara Quinn approached from the gunner's staging area, her M2 Browning already mounted on her assigned vehicle. Unlike most of the combat soldiers, Quinn carried herself with quiet competence rather than loud bravado. She nodded to Iris with something approaching professional respect. "Heard we're rolling through Serpent's Pass today," Quinn said, her voice low enough that only Iris could hear. "Command thinks the route's been quiet too long. Think they're right?" Iris considered the question, weighing her words carefully. Nothing stays quiet forever in this valley. Quinn nodded slowly, reading the subtext. Smart girl, she murmured. Most drivers don't think tactical. You notice things. Before Iris could respond, Brennan's voice boomed across the motor pool again. Hey Thorne, when you're done playing mechanic, maybe you could fetch us some coffee. That's about the speed for Convoy Club, right? More laughter followed, but Iris had already tuned it out, her attention focused on a detail that nagged at her train awareness. The left rear tire on her MRAP showed pressure slightly lower than spec. Nothing dramatic, but enough to affect handling on mountain switchbacks. She retrieved the compressor, methodical and unhurried, while around her the chaos of deployment preparation built toward crescendo. The radio in the operations building crackled to life, someone announcing final route confirmation and departure timeline. 30 minutes until wheels up. 30 minutes until they'd roll out into territory where quiet meant either safety or ambush, where every kilometer held possibilities Iris calculated with instincts most soldiers never developed. She finished adjusting the tire pressure, then pulled herself into the driver's seat, feeling the familiar weight of the armored vehicle around her. Through the windshield, she watched Hartwell climb into his position on the third truck, rifle cradled like a sacred object. Brennan mounted up with his squad, still trading jokes about drivers and real soldiers. Holloway consulted his tablet, probably reviewing route maps he'd studied, but never truly understood the way someone who'd driven them would. Iris breathed slowly, letting the morning settle into her bones. Her hands rested easy on the steering wheel, fingers that could strip and reassemble weapons in darkness, that had learned trigger discipline before most learned to ride bicycles. But here, in this motor pool surrounded by soldiers who saw only a driver, those hands simply gripped synthetic leather and waited for orders to roll out into whatever waited beyond the wire. The convoy rumbled to life with the deep-throated growl of diesel engines, 12 vehicles strong, carrying everything from ammunition to medical supplies for the firebase 20 kilometers north. Iris felt her MRAP vibrate beneath her, that familiar sensation she'd come to know as intimately as her own heartbeat. She adjusted her mirrors with practiced efficiency, checking sight lines and blind spots with the kind of attention most soldiers reserve for their weapons. Through her headset came Lieutenant Holloway's voice, crisp and textbook perfect. All vehicles check in. Acknowledge in sequence. The radio crackled as each driver confirmed readiness, their voices a mix of nervous tension and forced bravery. When Iris's turn came, she kept her response minimal. Lead vehicle, ready to roll. Brennan's voice cut through immediately after. Try not to get us lost, Thorne. I know reading maps is hard when you're used to following GPS. Several soldiers laughed over the open channel before Holloway shut down the chatter with a curt command. Radio discipline, people. This isn't a social call. The convoy gates groaned open, revealing the dusty ribbon of road that snaked into brown hills dotted with scrub vegetation. Iris eased her vehicle forward, feeling the weight of 32 lives rolling behind her in a steel serpent of vehicles. The morning sun climbed higher, turning the landscape into a study of harsh shadows and blinding light. Perfect conditions for an ambush, her father's voice whispered in her memory. When shadows are long and sight lines are compromised, she pushed the thought down, focusing instead on the road surface, on the kilometer markers, on the 1,000 small details that separated competent drivers from dead ones. The route ahead wound through increasingly narrow valleys, places where mountains pressed close on either side and escape options dwindled to none. Command called it a supply route. Soldiers who'd been here longer called it the Serpent's Pass, and not because it was easy to navigate. Private First Class Nico Velasquez drove the fourth vehicle in the convoy, an older soldier with 2 previous deployments and eyes that had seen enough to strip away illusions. His voice came through on a side channel, quiet and meant only for Iris. You feel it too, don't you? The way this morning tastes wrong. Iris keyed her mic carefully. Stay sharp, Velasquez. Trust your instincts. A pause, then his reply. You're not like the other drivers, Thorne. Don't know what your story is, but I've been around long enough to recognize when someone knows more than they're saying. She didn't respond, keeping her attention on the road as it began its first serious climb into the foothills. The MRAP handled the grade with mechanical determination, armor plating and reinforced chassis, making every curve a careful negotiation of physics and friction. Behind her, the convoy stretched like worried beads, each vehicle following at the proper interval. Her mind drifted for a moment to Montana, to the ranch where she'd grown up surrounded by mountains that made these hills look like wrinkles in a bedspread. Her father had built a shooting range that stretched across 3 valleys, teaching her to read wind and elevation before she could read chapter books. He'd made her track deer for days, not to kill, but to learn patience, to understand how prey and predator thought in that ancient dance of survival. "You've got a gift, Iris," he told her when she was 14, after she'd made a shot at 1,100 meters that most trained snipers would have missed. "But gifts come with choices. You can chase glory, or you can chase purpose. Just make sure you know the difference." She'd chosen purpose, or thought she had. Chosen to join the army as a driver, to serve without the weight of expectation that came with the name Thorne. Her father's reputation in the Marines was legendary, and she'd wanted to forge her own path, separate from his shadow. 3 years in, and she still wasn't sure if that choice had been wisdom or cowardice. The radio crackled again. "All vehicles, be advised. Intelligence reports increased insurgent activity in this sector over the past 72 hours. Keep weapons ready and eyes open." Iris's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. Increased activity meant pattern recognition, meant someone was watching convoy movements and timing attacks. It meant the quiet Serpent's Pass had been showing wasn't peace but preparation. She scanned the ridgelines on either side of the road, looking for the telltale signs her father had taught her to spot. Disturbed earth, absent birds, the wrong kind of stillness. There, on the eastern ridge, a section of rock face that looked slightly different, shadows that didn't quite match the angle of the sun. Could be nothing. Could be a hide position for an observer or worse. She keyed her mic lead vehicle to command. Possible observation point, eastern ridge, 200 meters ahead at your 11 o'clock. Holloway's response came with barely concealed irritation. "Thorne, unless you see confirmed hostile activity, keep the channel clear. We have actual combat soldiers scanning for threats." "Understood, sir," she replied, her voice neutral even as her jaw tightened. She marked the location mentally, adding it to the catalog of details she maintained without conscious thought. Brennan's voice followed Holloway's. "Maybe Thorne's seeing things in the rocks. Happens when you spend all day staring at roads instead of doing real work." Specialist Quinn's voice cut through the mockery, sharp as a blade. "Brennan, shut it. Some of us are trying to stay alive out here." The radio went quiet after that, just the rumble of engines and the crunch of tires on gravel road. The convoy climbed higher into the pass, vegetation thinning to almost nothing, leaving only rock and dust and the kind of exposure that made Iris's tactical awareness scream warnings. Every instinct she'd honed since childhood told her something was wrong, that the quiet pressing down on them was the kind that preceded violence. She checked her mirrors again, watching the vehicles behind her maintain formation. Hartwell sat in his gunner position on the third truck, rifle scanning the ridges with professional competence. He was good, she'd give him that. But good might not be enough if her instincts were right. The road narrowed further as they entered the true throat of the pass, mountains rising steep on both sides, creating a natural funnel with limited visibility beyond the next curve. Perfect terrain for what soldiers called a kill box, where attackers could rain fire from elevated positions while targets struggled to maneuver or escape. Her father had taught her to recognize these places, to feel them in her bones the way sailors felt storms brewing beyond the horizon. Iris maintained steady speed, professional and calm, while beneath that surface her mind ran calculations she couldn't share. Distance to potential firing positions, angles of approach, cover and concealment options, escape routes if everything went to hell. She was just a driver, after all, and drivers weren't supposed to think like tacticians or notice what combat soldiers missed. But she did notice. She always had. And as the convoy pushed deeper into the Serpent's Pass, Iris Thorne couldn't shake the feeling that very soon, hiding those skills would no longer be an option. The Serpent's Pass tightened around them like a fist, rock walls rising sheer on both sides as the convoy ground forward through the narrowest section of the route. Iris's eyes never stopped moving, cataloging every shadow, every outcropping, every place where the terrain offered advantage to those who knew how to use it. The silence pressing down felt wrong, felt manufactured, like the whole valley was holding its breath. She keyed her mic again, unable to stay silent despite knowing the reception her warnings would receive. Lead vehicle to command. No civilian traffic. No shepherds on the ridges. Valley's too quiet. Holloway's response came clipped with frustration. Thorne, I've told you once already. We have trained observers watching for threats. Focus on driving. But sir, she persisted, the urgency in her gut overriding protocol. The earth on that southern slope shows disturbance patterns. Recent digging could be fighting positions or IED emplacements. A long pause, then Brennan's voice dripping with condescension. Oh, now the driver's an expert on insurgent tactics. What's next, Thorne? You gonna teach Hartwell how to shoot? Laughter crackled through the radio, nervous and forced. Hartwell himself chimed in, his voice smooth with confidence. Appreciate the concern, sweetheart, but threat assessment is why they give us the rifles, and you get the steering wheel. Stick to what you know. Iris bit back her response, forcing herself to breathe slowly through the dismissal. They couldn't see what she saw because they hadn't been trained to see it. Her father's lessons had started before most soldiers learned to tie their boots. Read the terrain like a language, Iris. Mountains don't lie. They tell you everything if you know how to listen. And these mountains were screaming warnings that no one else could hear. The convoy rolled past what Iris had marked mentally as disturbed earth, her eyes tracking the slope with the kind of precision most soldiers reserve for confirmed targets. She saw it then, just a flash of reflected light where there should be none, gone so fast she almost doubted her own perception. Almost. But 30 meters higher on the ridge, another glint, this one lasting a heartbeat longer. Optics. Someone was glassing the convoy with binoculars or rifle scopes. Her heart rate climbed, but her hands remained steady on the wheel. Training took over, that deep muscle memory her father had built through 10,000 repetitions. Assess the threat. Calculate options. Prepare for action. But what action could she take without revealing skills she'd spent 3 years concealing? What would it cost her to stay silent? What would it cost others if she spoke? Velasquez's voice came through on their private channel, barely a whisper. You see them too, don't you? The Watchers. Iris felt a chill despite the heat building in the cab. You're sure? 3 positions I've marked so far, he replied, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Maybe more. They're waiting for something. Probably for us to reach full commitment into the kill zone. She knew he was right. The terrain ahead narrowed even further before opening into a slight valley where the Firebase road branched off. That bottleneck would be the ideal ambush point, where the convoy would be strung out and vulnerable, where escape routes would be non-existent and overlapping fields of fire would turn 12 vehicles into stationary targets. We need to warn command, Iris said quietly. Make them understand. Velasquez laughed, bitter and knowing. They won't listen to drivers. Thorne, you know that. We're furniture to them. Furniture doesn't have tactical insights. The radio crackled with routine traffic, status updates, and position reports. The mundane communication of soldiers who thought they were simply running supplies through a quiet valley. Holloway called for a speed check. Brennan made another joke about driver competence. Hartwell reported clear sight lines and no visible threats. The machinery of military procedure ground forward, blind to the danger that Iris felt wrapping around them like barbed wire. She made her decision in the space between heartbeats. Keyed her mic on the open channel. All vehicles, this is lead. I'm seeing multiple observation positions on both ridges. Recommend we halt and reassess before entering the narrows ahead. The explosion of angry responses came immediately. Holloway's voice cut through first, sharp with command authority. Thorne, you are way out of line. Stand down immediately. Brennan followed. His mockery turned to genuine anger. Who the hell do you think you are? You see some rocks, and suddenly your tactical command? Even Quinn, who'd shown Iris respect earlier, sounded uncertain. Thorn, I'm not seeing what you're seeing. Scopes are clear. Hartwell's voice carried dismissive finality. Look, driver girl, I've been scanning these ridges since we entered the pass. There's nothing there but your imagination. Maybe convoy duty isn't for you if you're going to panic every time you see a shadow. The words hit like physical blows, each one reinforcing the hierarchy that kept drivers in their place, that made her observations worthless because of the role she'd chosen. Iris felt the familiar weight of invisibility settling back over her shoulders, the price of anonymity she'd paid for 3 years. But beneath that weight, her tactical mind continued its calculations. The convoy was now 400 meters from the Narrows. At their current speed, they'd enter the kill zone in approximately 3 minutes. If she was right, if her instincts and training were correct, 32 soldiers would be caught in a carefully prepared ambush with minimal cover and maximum exposure. If she was wrong, she'd face disciplinary action for insubordination and confirming every doubt the combat soldiers held about drivers being unfit for forward deployment. 3 minutes to decide between her career and her conscience. 3 minutes to choose between the anonymity she'd cultivated and the skills her father had burned into her bones. 3 minutes before the mountains would show everyone whether Corporal Iris Thorn was a paranoid driver or something else entirely. Holloway's voice came through with cold finality. Thorn, you will maintain current speed and heading. Any further disruption of this operation will result in formal charges. Am I clear? Clear, sir, she replied, her voice steady even as her mind raced through scenarios and outcomes. The convoy rolled forward. The mountains watched, and somewhere in the rocks above, Iris knew with absolute certainty that men with weapons were making their own calculations, counting down their own timeline, waiting for the perfect moment to turn a supply run into a killing field. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white beneath sun-darkened skin, and prayed that when the shooting started, she'd be wrong about everything. 2 minutes to the Narrows. Iris watched the terrain funnel tighter, watched the walls rise higher, watched every tactical nightmare her father had ever described materialize in the dusty road ahead. The MRAP's engine hummed beneath her, oblivious to the dread coiling in her chest like razor wire. She forced herself to breathe, to maintain the steady competence expected of a convoy driver, while her mind mapped firing angles and covered positions with the precision of a surveyor. The mountains here showed their age in striations of rust and gray, layered stone that created natural firing steps at varying elevations. Perfect for coordinated ambush. Perfect for catching a convoy in overlapping fields of fire where every vehicle would be exposed simultaneously. She'd studied terrain like this in her father's lessons, back when she thought such knowledge was academic, something to appreciate in theory rather than survive in practice. Her radio earpiece crackled with routine chatter. Hartwell commenting on the heat. Quinn adjusting her gunner position. Brennan making another crack about how drivers probably got hazard pay for paper cuts. The normalcy of it felt obscene against what Iris knew was coming, like laughing in a cemetery or dancing at a funeral. Velasquez broke into their private channel again, his voice tight. I count 5 definite positions now. Maybe 6. This is coordinated, Thorn. This is planned. She knew. God, she knew. Every instinct screamed it. But what could she do? She'd already tried warning command, already been shot down and threatened with charges. Her tactical expertise meant nothing here because she wore the wrong uniform, drove the wrong vehicle, existed in the wrong space in the military hierarchy. Competence without authority was just noise. The lead vehicle entered the shadow of the Narrows, the mountain walls cutting the sun and dropping the temperature 10 degrees in seconds. Iris's hands adjusted automatically to the steering changes, muscle memory guiding the MRAP through terrain that required constant attention. Behind her, the convoy concertinaed slightly as each vehicle navigated the tighter turns. Spacing became irregular. Formation discipline ouverte. Now they were vulnerable, strung out, committed. Her father's voice echoed from 1,000 training sessions. When you're in the kill zone, Iris, you've already lost the tactical advantage. The only question is whether you survive long enough to regain it. Recognition is the first step. Most soldiers die because they don't realize they're in the box until the lid closes. She realized. She'd realized kilometers back. But realization without action was just another form of paralysis. Through her windshield, she saw the road open slightly ahead, a false promise of easier terrain that was actually the center of the kill box. Open enough for vehicles to cluster. Narrow enough that reversal would be impossible. Flanked by elevation that would rain death from above. Textbook ambush geography. 50 meters to that opening. 40, 30. Iris's foot hovered over the brake, every fiber of her being screaming to stop, to refuse to drive 32 soldiers into slaughter. But orders were orders. Chain of command was absolute. Drivers didn't make tactical decisions. Drivers didn't question combat soldiers. Drivers just drove and died and got replaced by the next body willing to sit behind a steering wheel. 20 meters. She saw movement then, just a flicker on the eastern ridge. Not imagination, not shadows playing tricks. Actual human movement as someone shifted position, preparing for engagement. Her combat awareness, honed through childhood and refined through 3 years of careful observation, registered the threat with crystalline clarity. 10 meters to the opening. Iris made a choice that would change everything. She slammed the brakes hard, her MRAP lurching to a stop with protesting tires and shock suspension. The vehicle behind her nearly rear-ended her position, horn blaring in surprise and anger. The entire convoy accordioned to a chaotic halt, drivers shouting over radios, soldiers cursing, Holloway's voice rising to a scream of rage. "Thorne, what the hell do you think you're doing? Move this vehicle immediately." She didn't respond, couldn't respond, because she was staring at the ridgeline where movement had resolved into definite human shapes. 3, 4, 5 figures rising from concealment with weapons coming to bear. She saw the rocket-propelled grenade launcher first, that distinctive profile unmistakable even at distance. Saw the rifles following. Saw the coordinated movement of a well-trained ambush team executing their plan. And she was sitting stationary in the lead vehicle, the most exposed position in the convoy, with approximately 3 seconds before those weapons opened fire. Time crystallized into that strange dilation she'd experienced on the range, where seconds stretched and the world slowed to accommodate impossible decisions. Her hands moved to release her seatbelt. Her door handle turned. Her boots hit the ground as Holloway's voice became a continuous stream of shouted orders and threats that meant nothing against the reality of men with guns preparing to kill everyone in this narrow valley. Iris heard Velasquez shouting a warning over the radio, his voice finally breaking through the command channel with words that would be too late. Contact right, multiple shooters on the eastern ridge. Then the world exploded into noise and chaos, and the kind of violence that turned training into instinct, that made 3 years of hiding irrelevant, that would force Corporal Iris Thorne to become someone she'd sworn she'd never be. The first RPG streaked from a ridge with a contrail of smoke and the whistling scream of inbound death. Iris watched its trajectory with the cold calculation her father had beaten in her bones, saw where it would impact, knew which vehicle would take the hit. The third truck in the convoy. Hartwell's position. The explosion was thunder and fire, metal shearing and men screaming. The shockwave hit Iris physically, slamming her against her MRAP's armored side. Her ears rang, but her vision stayed sharp, stayed focused, because survival depended on maintaining situational awareness even when the world tried to tear itself apart. Rifle fire erupted from multiple positions, the distinctive crack of AK-47s mixing with the heavier punch of PKM machine guns. Rounds sparked off armor plating. Windows shattered. Men dove for cover that didn't exist in this carefully prepared killing ground. Brennan was screaming orders that nobody could hear over the gunfire. Quinn's M2 Browning opened up, heavy .50 caliber rounds chewing into the mountainside in desperate suppression. Iris stayed low, moving along her vehicle's cover, her mind shifting into combat mode whether she wanted it to or not. She counted muzzle flashes, mapped firing positions, calculated ranges and angles with automatic precision. 9 separate shooters, maybe 10, coordinated fire discipline, professional execution. This wasn't amateur harassment. This was military-grade ambush by people who knew exactly what they were doing. And in the center of the kill zone, Hartwell's vehicle burned while soldiers scrambled to escape the inferno, their screams mixing with gunfire into a symphony of carnage that Iris had trained her entire life to prevent, but had failed to stop because no one would listen to a driver's warnings. The burning wreckage of Hartwell's vehicle painted the narrow valley in flickering orange light, black smoke billowing into the clear sky like a funeral pyre. Iris pressed herself against her MRAP's armored flank, feeling the impacts of incoming rounds vibrate through the metal. Each strike rang like a hammer on an anvil, the sound mixing with screams and return fire into a cacophony that would have paralyzed most soldiers. But paralysis was a luxury she couldn't afford. She risked a glance around the vehicle's edge, her trained eyes immediately cataloging the tactical situation with brutal clarity. Hartwell lay motionless on the ground, his body twisted at angles that spoke of finality. 2 other soldiers from his vehicle were down, one crawling desperately for cover while blood painted the dust beneath him. The remaining convoy members had scattered to whatever protection they could find, which in this kill box meant almost nothing. Brennan's voice cut through the radio chaos, raw with panic that his mockery had never hinted at. We're pinned down. Repeat, we are pinned down. Request immediate air support. Holloway tried to maintain command authority, but his voice cracked with the same fear. All units, return fire, return fire. Suppress those positions. But suppression required knowing where to shoot, and most of the soldiers were firing blindly at ridgelines, wasting ammunition on empty rocks while the actual shooters picked them apart from concealed positions. Quinn's heavy machine gun hammered away with determination, her fire discipline better than most, but even she was shooting at muzzle flashes rather than actual targets. Iris counted the seconds between insurgent volleys, timing their fire patterns with the precision of a metronome. Coordinated. Professional. These weren't desperate fighters taking opportunistic shots. This was a well-trained unit executing a rehearsed plan. She marked each firing position in her mental map, noting angles and elevations, calculating distances that most soldiers couldn't estimate within 100 meters. Eastern Ridge, 3 positions. Western Ridge, 4 positions. And 2 more somewhere higher up the southern slope, providing overwatch and picking off anyone who tried to maneuver. 9 confirmed shooters with overlapping fields of fire, turning the convoy into a shooting gallery where every target was exposed and every movement drew deadly attention. Velasquez's voice found her on their private channel, breathless and urgent. Thorne, they're going to kill us all. Every last one of us. She didn't answer because she knew he was right. Without effective counterfire, without someone who could identify and neutralize those positions, this convoy would be wiped out in the next 10 minutes. The insurgents had time, had position, had every advantage. The soldiers had armor that was now a trap, weapons they couldn't aim effectively, and leadership that was crumbling under pressure. A fresh burst of gunfire tore into the vehicle next to Iris, and she heard someone scream. Young voice, probably 19 or 20. Probably thought deployment would be adventure and valor, not bleeding out in a valley that didn't care about his dreams or his family waiting back home. The scream cut off abruptly, leaving just the continuous roar of weapons and the desperate shouts of men who'd never been taught how to die. Iris looked at Hartwell's body again, at the rifle lying 3 meters from his outstretched hand. An M110 semi-automatic sniper system, the designated marksman weapon that represented precision fire capability the convoy desperately needed. The weapon looked undamaged despite the chaos around it, still functional, still lethal in the right hands. In her hands, the calculation was simple. She could stay here, maintain her cover as just another driver, and watch everyone die. Or she could move to that rifle, take up a firing position, and reveal every skill she'd spent 3 years hiding. There would be no going back, no more anonymity, no more escape from her father's legacy or the expectations that came with the name Thorne. But 32 lives hung in the balance, and wasn't that why she'd learned these skills in the first place? Not for glory or recognition, but for moments exactly like this when competence meant the difference between bodies and survivors. Her father's voice again, clear as if he stood beside her in this hell. You got a gift, Iris. But gifts come with responsibility. The question isn't whether you can make the shot. The question is whether you're willing to live with not taking it. She took a breath, made her peace, then moved. Iris burst from cover low and fast, her body remembering drills her father had run her through 1,000 times. Sprint to Hartwell's position. Ignore the incoming fire. Trust your speed and the shooter's reaction time. She covered the 3 meters in a blur, sliding the last bit on her knees to grab the rifle. Rounds cracked overhead, close enough to feel the pressure wave, but training kept her focused. The M110 felt right in her hands despite years away from serious shooting. Muscle memory took over as she checked the chamber, confirmed the magazine, adjusted the scope's parallax for the distances she'd already calculated. The rifle was zeroed for someone else, but she could compensate. She'd been compensating for other people's equipment since she was 14. Brennan's voice screamed over the radio. Who the hell is moving out there? Get back to cover. But Iris was already scanning, her eye finding the scope's glass, her breathing settling into the rhythm her father had drilled until it became automatic. Slow inhale, slower exhale. Let the crosshairs settle. Find a target. Squeeze, don't pull. Eastern Ridge, second position from the north. She'd marked him earlier, watched his pattern, knew his timing. He was good but predictable, popping up every 8 seconds to fire a controlled burst before dropping back to cover. She could see his muzzle flash, could track backward to estimate his exact position, could calculate the hold needed for the distance. 750 meters. Moderate wind from the west. Elevation advantage to the target. She adjusted the scope's turrets from memory, compensating for Hartwell 0 versus her own calculations. The insurgent rose to fire again, his silhouette clear for just a moment against the sky. Iris's finger took up the trigger slack, found a break point, squeezed through it with the patience of someone who'd done this 10,000 times in practice and never once in anger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The scope picture bounced, then settled. And on the eastern ridge, 750 meters away, a man who'd been trying to kill American soldiers stopped moving forever. The effect was immediate. The incoming fire from that position ceased. Soldiers near Iris stopped shooting, their heads turning toward her in shock and confusion. Even the insurgents seemed to pause, their rhythm disrupted by the sudden loss of one of their own to precision fire they hadn't expected from a trapped convoy. And Corporal Iris Thorne, who'd spent 3 years as an invisible driver, worked the bolt and searched for her second target, knowing that once she started down this path, there would be no turning back. The brief pause in enemy fire lasted maybe 3 seconds before the remaining insurgents adjusted their tactics, recognizing that someone in the convoy had teeth. But those 3 seconds gave Iris what she needed. Time to settle into position. Time to let her training override the chaos. Time to become what her father had spent 15 years preparing her to be. She shifted behind a cluster of rocks that provided minimal cover but adequate stability for prone shooting. The M110 rested against her shoulder like it belonged there. The scope picture clear despite the heat shimmer rising from sun-baked stone. Her breathing found its rhythm automatically, that deep calm that descended when bullets flew and decisions became binary. Shoot or don't shoot. Hit or miss. Live or die. Western Ridge, northern position. The shooter there had been firing in disciplined 3-round bursts, good fire control, probably former military. He'd taken cover after a first shot, smart enough to recognize the threat had changed. but he'd have to expose himself eventually to maintain pressure on the convoy. Insurgents understood that letting Americans consolidate meant calling in air support, and air support meant death from above. She waited. Patience was the sniper's greatest weapon. Her father had preached. Any fool can pull a trigger. A professional waits for the shot. Movement. The shooter rose, partially from cover, rifle coming up. 800 meters, quartering wind, slight uphill angle. Iris made her adjustments on instinct, the math so ingrained it no longer required conscious thought. Her finger found the trigger's reset, took up the slack, pressed through the break point with smooth inevitability. The rifle spoke. The shooter dropped. 2 down. Brennan's voice exploded over the radio, confusion mixing with something that might have been hope. Who's shooting? Who the hell is making those shots? Quinn answered, her voice tight with disbelief. I think it's Thorne. I think it's the driver. Impossible, Holloway snapped back. Drivers don't have that training. But Iris wasn't listening to radio chatter anymore. She was in what her father called the zone, that state of hyperfocus where the world narrowed to scope picture and trigger press, where time stretched and consequences faded and nothing existed except the next target. It was dangerous to go this deep, to let the combat trance take over, but it was also the only way to achieve what needed achieving. Eastern Ridge, southern position. This shooter had been laying down suppressive fire with a PCAM machine gun, keeping soldiers pinned while his teammates picked them off. The weapon's distinctive sound cut through the chaos, and Iris tracked backward from muzzle flash to firing position with practiced ease. 900 meters. Longer shot. More variables. But she'd made 1,000-meter shots in Montana wind that would have grounded helicopters. She waited for the machine gunner's pattern to repeat. He fired in sustained bursts, then ducked to reload or reposition. Predictable. Fatal. When he rose again, Iris was ready. The crosshairs settled on center mass. The wind call felt right. She squeezed. The machine gun went silent. 3 down. The remaining insurgents had to be rattled now. 3 of their team eliminated in under 2 minutes by someone they couldn't see, couldn't locate, couldn't suppress. The psychological impact of precision fire worked both ways. It gave confidence to friendlies and instilled dread in enemies. Iris had seen it in her father's stories, read about it in after-action reports, but never experienced it firsthand until this moment. She chambered another round, scanning for the next threat. The insurgents had gone aground, their fire slackening as survival instinct overrode tactical objectives. But they weren't breaking contact yet. Not with their escape routes still open and Americans still trapped in the kill box. They'd regroup, adapt, try to locate whoever was systematically dismantling their ambush. Western Ridge, center position. Iris caught movement as someone tried to shift locations, probably trying to flank or get an angle on the mystery shooter. Bad decision. The movement exposed him for just a heartbeat, but a heartbeat was all she needed. 700 meters, minimal wind, clear sight picture. She fired. He fell. For down. Now Velasquez's voice joined the radio chaos, his tone mixing awe with urgency. Whoever you are, whatever you are, keep shooting. You're keeping us alive. Iris worked the rifle's action with mechanical efficiency, brass ejecting and fresh rounds chambering in smooth rhythm. She was burning through Hartwell's ammunition faster than sustainable, but sustainability wasn't the goal. Breaking this ambush was the goal. Getting 31 surviving soldiers out of this valley was the goal. Everything else was negotiable. Southern slope, Overwatch position. The hardest shot yet. This shooter had stayed disciplined, hadn't exposed himself unnecessarily, understood that patience won sniper duels. But he made the mistake of checking his fellow insurgent's position, rising just enough to scan the western ridge where his teammate had fallen. Iris saw the movement, calculated the extreme range at over 1,100 meters, factored in the updraft from the heated valley floor, and took a shot that stretched the M110's effective range to its limits. The recoil pushed her shoulder. The scope bounced. She fought it back to target picture, in time, to see the distant figure crumple. 5 down. The enemy fire had decreased to sporadic, disorganized shots. The ambush was collapsing. Whoever had planned this operation hadn't accounted for a variable they couldn't have predicted. They prepared for convoy soldiers with standard training, standard equipment, standard responses. They hadn't prepared for someone who could read terrain like text, who could make shots that defied probability, who could turn their carefully prepared kill box into a hunting ground where they became the prey. Iris shifted positions, moving before counterfire could find her. Movement was survival. Static was death. She low-crawled to new cover, the rifle cradled against her chest, her body remembering drills her father had run in Montana snowstorms and summer heat, and every condition between. By the time incoming rounds peppered her old position, she was already 20 feet away, settling into a new firing stance, scanning for targets 6 through 9. Because there were still 4 insurgents active. For shooters who could still kill. For enemies between this convoy and survival. And Corporal Iris Thorne, who'd spent 3 years pretending to be just a driver, had approximately 8 minutes of ammunition left to finish what she'd started and prove that some gifts, no matter how carefully hidden, would always rise when needed most. The remaining insurgents had gone defensive. Their ambush turned against them in ways that violated every tactical assumption they'd made. Iris could feel their confusion through the changed pattern of fire, the hesitation in their movements, the way they now shot to suppress rather than kill. They were trying to break contact, to extract before whoever was hunting them claimed more lives. But extraction required movement, and movement meant exposure. She waited in her new position, controlling her breathing despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The M110's barrel was hot from sustained fire, heat waves rising from the metal in visible distortion. She'd burned through 3 magazines, her ammunition situation approaching critical. But 4 targets remained, and 4 was still 4 too many. Eastern Ridge, final position on that side. The shooter there had shown discipline, staying low, only rising when absolutely necessary. But necessary had a way of becoming inevitable in combat. His teammates were dying, his fire team was broken, and eventually survival instinct would force a choice between running and dying in place. Iris bet on running. She was right. The insurgent broke from cover, scrambling higher up the ridge toward a rally point or escape route that would take him over the crest and out of effective engagement range. He moved fast, using available terrain, but he was also silhouetted against the sky. 850 meters and climbing. Moving target. Elevated angle. Wind gusting from thermal updrafts. The kind of shot most marksmen wouldn't attempt. Iris led the target, calculated his speed, adjusted for the climbing angle that would pull her shot low. Her father's voice echoed through the years. Moving targets aren't about prediction, Iris. They're about understanding physics. You're not shooting where they are. You're shooting where they and your bullet will arrive at the same point in space and time. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The runner stumbled and fell, tumbling down the ridge in a cascade of loose rock and finality. 6 down. Holloway's voice came through the radio. All command authority stripped away, replaced by raw disbelief. Thorne, is that you? Are you making these shots? Iris didn't respond. Didn't have time to explain or justify. 3 shooters remained, and her ammunition was down to 1 magazine. 15 rounds for 3 targets, plus margin for error. The math was getting tight. Western Ridge, 1 shooter remaining on that side. He'd gone completely to ground after watching 3 of his teammates fall. Smart, patient, probably the team leader, experienced enough to know that exposing himself meant death. But he was also trapped by the same terrain that had made this such an effective ambush site. The ridges were steep, the routes limited. He'd have to move eventually. Iris settled in to wait, letting her breathing slow, letting her heart rate drop. This was the sniper's game distilled to its essence. Patience versus pressure. Stillness versus necessity. 2 people with rifles, and the question of who would make the first mistake. Minutes crawled past. The convoy's return fire had ceased, soldiers conserving ammunition and waiting to see how this impossible situation resolved. She could hear Brennan issuing orders to prepare for emergency evacuation of the wounded. Could hear Quinn calling in their position for medical support. Could hear the sounds of soldiers doing soldier things while she did what she'd been born and trained to do. Movement. Finally, the Western Ridge shooter tried to low crawl to a better position, probably hoping the distraction of convoy reorganization would cover his movement. But Iris's focus never wavered. She tracked the subtle disturbance in the rocks, the slight shift of shadow that indicated human presence. When his head and shoulders cleared cover for just a moment, she was ready. The shot felt perfect. The rifle's recoil rolled through her shoulder with familiar comfort. 720 meters. Center mass. The insurgents' movement ceased with the abrupt finality of a cut wire. 7 down. 2 remaining. Both on the southern slope, in overwatch positions that had given them command of the entire kill box. These would be the hardest. They'd watched 7 teammates fall to precision fire. They knew they were up against someone exceptional. They'd be careful, disciplined, willing to wait for opportunities that might never come. But they'd also seen their ambush destroyed and their survival increasingly unlikely. Desperation made people reckless, and recklessness created opportunities. Iris shifted her position again, moving laterally to change her angle of attack. The southern slope positions had good cover from the valley floor, but were exposed to flanking fire from her new location. She settled behind a sun-heated boulder, using the heat shimmer as natural camouflage, and began her search for targets 8 and 9. The first one revealed himself through poor discipline. He shifted a check on his partner, turning his head just enough that his profile broke the ridgeline. 940 meters. Difficult, but makeable. Iris compensated for the distance, for the late afternoon wind that had picked up as temperatures shifted for the slight upward angle. Her finger found the trigger's familiar resistance, pressed through it with the certainty of 10,000 practice repetitions. 8 down. 1 shooter left. 1 insurgent between the convoy and survival. But finding him was proving impossible. He'd gone completely still, probably understanding that his only chance was to wait for darkness and then extract under cover of night. It was the smart play, the professional choice, and it might have worked against normal soldiers. But Iris wasn't normal. She'd been tracking shadows and reading mountains since childhood. Her father had taught her that the best hides were psychological as much as physical. People hid where they felt safe, where they thought enemies wouldn't look, where their own instincts drew them. An instinct said to put your back against solid rock and watch the approaches. She scanned the southern slope with new perspective, looking not for movement or exposure, but for the places where she would hide if roles were reversed. There, a cluster of boulders that created a natural fortification with sight lines across the entire valley. Perfect defensive position, which made the obvious choice. And obvious was predictable. Iris couldn't see the shooter, couldn't confirm target acquisition with visual identification. But she could see the hide position, could calculate where someone would have to be to utilize that cover effectively. It was shooting at inference rather than confirmation. Risky, potentially wasteful of her dwindling ammunition. But sometimes war demanded educated guesses backed by years of experience. She aimed at where logic said a shooter would position himself in that boulder cluster, adjusted for the 1,000-meter distance, steadied her breathing, and fired 3 shots in rapid succession, walking them through the most likely positions inside that hide. For a long moment, nothing. Then a rifle clattered down the slope, tumbling from the boulders and landing in the dust below. No body, no confirmation, but the weapon's fall told the story. Either she'd scored a hit or the insurgent had abandoned his weapon in panic. Either way, the threat was neutralized. 9 down. The valley fell silent except for the wind and the crackle of burning vehicles. Iris stayed in position for another 3 minutes, scanning for any remaining threats, confirming that the ambush was truly broken. When no more fire came, when no more movement revealed hidden enemies, she finally allowed herself to lower the rifle. Her hands were shaking now that the combat trance was fading. Her shoulder ached from sustained recoil. Her ears rang despite the discipline of conscious hearing protection. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she understood that the person she'd been 3 years ago, The anonymous driver, who'd wanted nothing more than to serve quietly, had died in this valley alongside Hartwell and the others. Corporal Iris Thorne had revealed herself, and there was no taking it back. Iris remained frozen in her firing position for several heartbeats after the last shot, her training demanding confirmation that no additional threats lurked in the rocks. The M110 felt heavier now, the weight of what she'd done settling into her muscles and bones. 9 enemies eliminated in 14 minutes. 14 minutes that had stripped away 3 years of careful anonymity and exposed skills she'd sworn to keep buried. The radio crackled with stunned voices overlapping in confusion and disbelief. Brennan was calling for status reports. Quinn was directing soldiers to secure the perimeter. Holloway kept demanding to know who had been providing the precision fire that saved them all. But beneath the tactical chatter, Iris heard something else. Awe, fear, the kind of reaction people had when witnessing something that shouldn't be possible. She finally moved, pushing herself up from the prone position, her legs unsteady beneath her. The adrenaline crash was coming, that inevitable aftermath of combat that left soldiers shaking and sick. But she couldn't afford weakness right now. Not when 31 surviving soldiers were about to turn their attention toward the driver who'd just performed like an elite sniper. Velasquez appeared first, materializing from behind a vehicle with his rifle still raised, scanning for threats. His eyes found Iris standing there with Hartwell's M110, and his weathered face went through a series of expressions too complex to catalog. Shock, recognition, understanding. He lowered his weapon slowly, like a man reassessing everything he thought he knew. Jesus Christ, he breathed. It was you. The whole time, it was you. Iris didn't respond. Didn't trust her voice yet. She ejected the M110's magazine, cleared the chamber with mechanical precision, and safed the weapon exactly as her father had taught her. Muscle memory providing comfort in a moment when everything else felt uncertain. More soldiers emerged from cover, drawn by the silence where chaos had been. They moved cautiously at first, expecting renewed fire, but as seconds became minutes without additional contact, confidence returned. And with it came questions. Dozens of soldiers converging on the center of the convoy, all trying to understand what had just happened, who had saved them, how an impossible situation had become survival. Then Brennan appeared, picking his way through the debris and dust, his face smudged with powder residue, and his eyes wide with something that looked like shell shock. He saw Iris holding the rifle and stopped dead, his expression cycling through disbelief to anger to confusion so rapidly it would have been comical under different circumstances. Thorne? His voice cracked on her name. That was you? You made those shots? She met his gaze steadily, her gray eyes reflecting none of the chaos she felt inside. Yes, Sergeant, but you're a driver. You're just a driver. The words hung in the air like an accusation, like she'd somehow violated the natural order by being more than he'd allowed her to be. Iris felt a flicker of anger cut through her exhaustion. Just a driver. 3 years of hearing that phrase, of being dismissed and mocked and treated like furniture. 3 years of watching combat soldiers strut while she possessed skills they couldn't imagine. I'm a soldier, she replied quietly. Same as anyone else here. Quinn pushed through the gathering crowd, her face streaked with sweat and her eyes locked on Iris with new intensity. Where did you learn to shoot like that? That wasn't basic marksmanship. That was operator-level precision. Iris felt the weight of 31 pairs of eyes boring into her, demanding explanations, requiring answers to questions she'd spent years avoiding. Her father's training had included this scenario, preparing for the moment when secrets became public and choices became consequences. Be honest but brief, he'd said. Give them truth, but don't apologize for competence. You earned these skills through blood and sweat. Own them. My father trained me, Iris said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. Gunnery Sergeant Wade Thorne, Marine Corps. He taught me to shoot before I could ride a bicycle. The name dropped like a grenade into the conversation. Wade Thorne was legend in military circles, a Marine sniper whose exploits had become the stuff of stories told in every training facility. multiple deployments, hundreds of confirmed kills. A teacher who'd trained an entire generation of precision marksmen. And his daughter had been driving supply trucks while hiding skills that would have made her famous. Brennan's face went pale. Wade Thorne is your father? The Wade Thorne? Iris nodded once, sharp and military. Holloway finally arrived, pushing through the crowd with lieutenant's authority, though his earlier confidence had evaporated. His eyes found Iris, traveled to the rifle in her hands, moved to the ridgelines where 9 bodies lay cooling. The mathematical impossibility of what had occurred seemed to be warring with the physical evidence of saved lives. Corporal Thorne, he said slowly, each word measured. You eliminated 9 hostile shooters in approximately 14 minutes. Long-range precision fire under combat conditions. Without orders. Without authorization. Yes, sir, Iris replied, hearing the formal charges being constructed in his tone. You saved this entire convoy. Every soldier here is alive because of your actions. Yes, sir. Holloway seemed to struggle with how to proceed. Military procedure demanded he address the breach of chain of command, the unauthorized use of a weapon not assigned to her, the failure to follow orders. But reality demanded he acknowledge that without her actions, they'd all be body bags waiting for transport. The two truths were incompatible, creating cognitive dissonance that showed on his face. Why didn't you tell anyone? Quinn asked, her voice cutting through the tension. Why hide this? You could have been assigned as a marksman. Could have been running scout operations instead of driving trucks. Iris looked at her, then at the gathered soldiers, then at the burning wreckage that had been Hartwell's vehicle. How did you explain wanting to serve without the weight of expectation? How did you describe the burden of a famous father's legacy? How did you make them understand that being extraordinary attracted attention she'd never wanted? I joined to serve, not to be famous, she finally said. My father's name opens doors and creates pressure. I wanted to prove myself on my own terms. By driving trucks? Brennan's voice held disbelief and something that might have been embarrassment. By letting us treat you like you were nothing? I'm a driver, Iris replied, steel entering her tone. That's the job I chose. That's the role I serve. What happened today doesn't change that. But it did change it. She could see it in their faces, in the way they looked at her now. The mockery was gone, replaced by wariness and respect and the uncomfortable realization that they'd been wrong about everything. The hierarchy that put combat soldiers above support personnel had just been shattered by someone they considered beneath notice. Velasquez spoke up, his gravelly voice carrying authority earned through multiple deployments. What Corporal Thorne did today saved 31 lives. Whatever happened before, whatever happens next, that's the truth that matters. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the soldiers. Men who'd been pinned down and facing death, who'd watched friends fall and expected to follow, who'd been saved by precision fire from an impossible source. They didn't care about chain of command or proper procedure. They cared about being alive. Holloway seemed to deflate slightly, recognizing that military justice and combat reality rarely aligned perfectly. We'll address this properly when we return to base. But Corporal Thorne, he paused, searching for words. Thank you. For disobeying orders. For saving us all. Iris nodded once, accepting the acknowledgement without pride or false modesty. She'd done what needed doing, revealed what needed revealing, and now would face whatever consequences followed. But as she stood there surrounded by soldiers who finally saw her, really saw her for the first time, she felt something unexpected. Relief. The exhausting weight of hiding had lifted, replaced by a different burden, but an honest one. She was still Corporal Iris Thorne, still a soldier, but no longer just a driver in anyone's eyes. The convoys returned to forward operating base as Sentinel took 3 hours, moving at reduced speed with heightened security and a weight of 4 body bags secured in the rear vehicles. Hartwell and 3 others who hadn't survived the initial moments of the ambush. For soldiers who would go home in flag-draped coffins because Iris's warnings had been ignored until bullets made believers of everyone. She drove her MRAP in the same lead position, but everything felt different now. The radio chatter included her in tactical discussions. Soldiers asked her opinion on terrain features and potential threat areas. Brennan's voice had lost its mocking edge, replaced by something closer to deference that made her more uncomfortable than the mockery ever had. Quinn rode in the passenger seat beside her, having volunteered for the position with an intensity that suggested questions were coming. For the first hour, they'd driven in silence, each processing the day's events in their own way. But as the base came into view on the horizon, Quinn finally spoke. "My brother went through sniper school," she said quietly. "Washed out in week 3. Said it was the hardest training he'd ever attempted." "How old were you when you started?" 8, Iris replied, keeping her eyes on the road. "My father built a range on our property in Montana. Started me on fundamentals before most kids learn multiplication tables." 8 years old, Quinn repeated, something like awe in her voice. "Most people can't make a 1,000-meter shot after years of training. You were doing it before high school." "It wasn't like that," Iris said, searching for words to explain a childhood that most people couldn't comprehend. "My father didn't push me. He taught me because I wanted to learn, because I had aptitude. He always said gifts should be developed, not wasted." "But you wasted it," Quinn said, not unkindly. 3 years driving trucks when you could have been saving lives like you did today." Iris felt the accusation land, even though Quinn's tone held no judgment. It was the same question she'd asked herself countless times, especially in the dark hours when doubt crept in. Had she been selfish? Had her desire for anonymity cost lives that she could have saved? "I didn't think of it as waste," Iris said finally. "I thought of it as choosing my own path. My father's reputation is huge. People hear the name Thorne, and they have expectations, standards, comparisons. I wanted to serve without that weight. And now everyone knows," Iris said simply. "Now, there's no going back." The base gates appeared ahead, and Iris felt her stomach tighten. Word would have spread already. Radio communications would have been monitored. Command would know that something extraordinary had happened in the Serpent's Pass. They'd know that a convoy driver had performed at a level that defied explanation and demanded investigation. As they rolled through the gates, Iris saw what she'd expected. Soldiers lined the route, watching the convoys return with unusual attention. Officers stood outside the operations building, waiting. Even the base commander, Colonel Dominic Ashford, had emerged from his office, his presence indicating that this was no routine after-action review. The convoy halted in the motor pool, engines dying in sequence until only silence remained. Iris sat in her driver's seat for a moment, hands still on the wheel, breathing slowly and preparing for whatever came next. Beside her, Quinn placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture brief but supportive. "For what it's worth," Quinn said softly, "I'm glad you were there. Glad you broke cover. 31 families still have their soldiers because you did." Iris nodded, not trusting her voice, and opened her door. The heat hit her immediately, that dry furnace blast that characterized this region. She stepped down from the MRAP with her rifle still slung, her uniform dusty and stained with sweat and powder residue. Every eye in the motor pool tracked her movement. Colonel Ashford approached with measured strides, his weathered face unreadable. He was career military, 40 years of service that showed in his bearing and the ribbons on his chest. He'd seen combat in 3 theaters, commanded thousands of soldiers, and developed the kind of instinct that separated good officers from merely competent ones. "Corporal Thorne," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet motor pool. "My office. Now." "Yes, sir," Iris replied, falling in a step behind him. They crossed the base in silence, soldiers parting like water around them. Iris felt the weight of their stares, heard the whispered conversations that started the moment they passed. The story was already spreading, growing with each retelling. The driver who saved the convoy, the hidden sniper, Wade Thorne's daughter, each version adding details or subtracting nuance until the truth became legend. Ashford's office was Spartan, decorated only with unit citations and a single photograph of his family. He gestured for Iris to sit, then settled behind his desk with the patience of someone who'd learned that rushing conversations produced poor results. For a long moment, he simply studied her, his eyes taking in details that most people would miss. "Lieutenant Holloway sent me preliminary reports," he finally said. 9 hostile combatants eliminated. Estimated ranges between 700 and 1100 meters. Perfect or near-perfect accuracy. Moving targets. Difficult conditions. He paused. "If I didn't know better, I'd say those numbers were impossible." "Yes, sir," Iris said, because there was nothing else to say. "But they're not impossible, are they? Because you're Wade Thorne's daughter. Because you've been trained by one of the finest marksmen the Marine Corps ever produced." "Yes, sir." Ashford leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking slightly. "Why didn't you disclose this during your enlistment? Skills like that are exactly what we need. Exactly what could save lives." Iris met his gaze steadily. "With respect, sir, I disclosed everything required. My marksmanship scores were in my file. The fact that I didn't volunteer additional information about my father or my training wasn't deception. It was privacy. Privacy that cost us," Ashford said quietly. "You were assigned to convoy duty when you could have been conducting precision operations. Could have been training other soldiers. Could have been an asset instead of anonymous." The words stung because they were true, but they were also incomplete, missing the context of what living in Wade Thorne's shadow meant. Missing the pressure of constant comparison. Missing the weight of expectations that crushed as often as they elevated. "I served honorably," Iris said, steel entering her voice. "I performed every duty assigned to me. I asked for no special treatment and received none. What I chose not to reveal was my choice to make." Ashford's expression shifted, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "You're right. You fulfilled your obligations. But today you exceeded them by a magnitude that demands recognition. You saved 31 lives, Corporal. That's not something the Army ignores." "I was just doing my job, sir." "Your job is driving trucks," Ashford said, a slight smile touching his weathered face. "What you did today was something else entirely. Something that suggests your talents are being criminally underutilized." Iris felt the weight of what was coming, the inevitable reassignment that would pull her from the anonymity she'd fought to maintain. But looking at Colonel Ashford's face, seeing the mixture of respect and determination there, she understood that fighting it would be pointless. She'd revealed herself. Now she'd face the consequences. "What happens now, sir?" she asked quietly. Ashford stood, moving to the window that overlooked the base. "Now we acknowledge reality, Corporal. You're not just a driver. You never were. And pretending otherwise does a disservice to you, to your father's training, and to every soldier whose life you could save with those skills." He turned back to face her, his expression serious but not unkind. "I'm recommending you for commendation, for valor under fire and extraordinary marksmanship. I'm also reassigning you effective immediately to precision marksman duties with option for advanced sniper training, if you're willing." Iris felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Permission, validation, the freedom to be what she'd always been without the weight of hiding. "I'm willing, sir," she said. Word spread through forward operating base Sentinel like wildfire through dry grass. By evening, every soldier knew some version of the story. The driver who'd saved the convoy, the hidden sniper, Wade Thorne's daughter who'd been among them for 3 years, invisible in plain sight. Each telling added embellishment, but the core truth remained. Corporal Iris Thorne had done something extraordinary, and the base would never see her the same way again. She returned to her quarters to find a crowd gathered outside. Soldiers waiting with a mixture of curiosity and respect that made her deeply uncomfortable. Some wanted to shake her hand. Others simply stared as if trying to reconcile the quiet driver they'd ignored with the operator who'd eliminated 9 enemies in 14 minutes. Iris pushed through with minimal interaction, desperate for the privacy that seemed increasingly impossible. Inside, her bunkmate had already packed Iris's gear and moved it to new quarters. Single room, usually reserved for senior NCOs or visiting personnel. A handwritten note explained that Colonel Ashford had authorized the upgrade, That precision marksman required proper rest conditions. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight. Recognition. Status. The visible markers of importance that Iris had spent 3 years avoiding. She sat on the new bunk, finally alone, and let the day's events wash over her. The ambush. The decision to reveal herself. The feel of the rifle. The faces of men falling at distances most people couldn't clearly see. 9 lives ended by her hand. 31 lives saved by her actions. The mathematics of survival written in gunpowder and blood. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, but Iris knew the sender before opening it. Only one person would have tracked her down this quickly. Heard what you did today. Your old man will be proud. Hell, I am proud. Welcome back to the world, Iris. She stared at the message from her father for a long moment, emotions too complex to name swirling through her chest. Pride, relief, fear, grief for the anonymity she'd lost, gratitude for the skills that had saved lives. She typed and deleted several responses before settling on simplicity. Thank you, Dad. I'm okay. A knock at her door interrupted the moment. Iris opened it to find Brennan standing in the hallway, his earlier swagger completely absent. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the realization of how wrong he'd been about everything. He met her eyes briefly, then looked away, struggling with words. Corporal Thorne, he started, his voice rough. I need to apologize for the way I treated you, the things I said. I was wrong about you, about everything. Iris studied him, seeing genuine regret in his posture and expression. She could have enjoyed his discomfort, could have made him suffer for 3 years of mockery and dismissal. But watching him struggle with his pride and prejudice, she found she didn't have the energy for vindictiveness. You treated me the way the system taught you to treat drivers, she said quietly. The hierarchy exists for reasons. You were just following the culture. That's not an excuse, Brennan said, forcing himself to meet her gaze. You tried to warn us. In the past. You saw the ambush coming, and I shut you down. Hartwell died because I wouldn't listen to a driver's tactical assessment. The words hung between them, heavy with the weight of consequences that couldn't be undone. Iris had replayed those moments 1,000 times already, wondering if she could have done more, said something different, forced them to listen. But the past was fixed, immutable, written in decisions that seemed obvious only in hindsight. Hartwell died because insurgents planned an ambush, she said firmly. Not because you followed your training. Not because I failed to convince you. War kills people, Sergeant. Sometimes despite our best efforts. Brennan nodded slowly, accepting the absolution even if he didn't quite believe it. You saved my life today. Saved all of us. I won't forget that. After he left, more visitors came. Quinn with questions about training methodology. The last guest with quiet respect and offers of friendship. Junior soldiers who'd heard the stories and wanted to see the legend in person. Each interaction chipped away at the anonymity Iris had cultivated, replacing it with a visibility that felt both validating and suffocating. By the time evening formation was called, Iris had accepted that her old life was truly over. She dressed in a clean uniform, checked her appearance with military precision, and stepped outside to find half the base waiting to see what would happen next. Colonel Ashford stood on the operations building steps, his presence commanding immediate attention. The gathered soldiers fell into formation with practiced efficiency, hundreds of bodies arranging themselves into perfect lines. Iris found her position among them, no longer invisible, no longer just another face in the crowd. The colonel's voice carried across the assembled troops with parade ground clarity. Today, several of our soldiers faced an ambush in the Serpent's Pass. For brave men gave their lives. Many more would have joined them if not for extraordinary courage and skill demonstrated by one soldier. He paused, letting the moment build. Corporal Iris Thorne, front and center. Iris felt her body move on autopilot, muscle memory executing commands while her mind struggled to process the reality of public recognition. She marched to the front, executed a perfect halt, and saluted the colonel with precision her father would have approved of. Corporal Thorne eliminated 9 hostile combatants at extreme range under combat conditions. Ashford continued. Her actions saved 31 American soldiers and broke an ambush that would have destroyed an entire convoy. This is the kind of courage and competence that defines our military. He produced a small case, opening it to reveal the Army Commendation Medal with V device for valor. The medal caught the fading sunlight, glinting with significance that went far beyond the physical object. This represented official recognition, permanent record, the end of anonymity. For conspicuous gallantry and extraordinary marksmanship in combat, Ashford said, pinning the medal to her chest. The United States Army recognizes your service and sacrifice. The assembled soldiers erupted in applause, hundreds of hands creating thunder that rolled across the base. Iris stood at attention, accepting the recognition with military bearing, while inside she felt the weight of transformation settling into her bones. She was no longer Corporal Thorne, anonymous driver. She was Corporal Thorne, precision marksman, daughter of a Marine legend, savior of 31 lives, person of note. As the formation dismissed and soldiers crowded around to offer congratulations, Iris caught sight of her reflection in a nearby window. She looked the same. Same gray eyes, same weathered features, same uniform, now adorned with fresh metal and the visible markers of recognition. But something fundamental had shifted, some internal barrier between who she'd been and who she was becoming. Quinn appeared at her shoulder, grinning with genuine warmth. How does it feel, being seen for who you really are? Iris considered the question, searching for honest answer in the chaos of emotion and exhaustion. Terrifying, she admitted, and maybe a little bit right. The crowd pressed closer, voices overlapping with questions and praise and requests for stories. Iris let herself be carried along by the momentum, no longer fighting the visibility, no longer hiding the skills that had been part of her identity since childhood. She'd spent 3 years trying to be someone else, someone smaller, someone anonymous. Tonight, standing in the center of attention she'd always avoided, Iris Thorne finally understood what her father had meant about gifts and responsibility. Skills weren't meant to be hidden. They were meant to be used, developed, shared. And maybe the real courage wasn't in making impossible shots under fire. Maybe the real courage was in accepting who you were, even when the world watched. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened. Over the following weeks, Iris Thorne's role at Forward Operating Base Sentinel evolved in ways that forced her to confront everything she'd been avoiding. Colonel Ashford wasted no time implementing her reassignment, placing her with the base's precision marksman team and authorizing additional training resources that had previously been unavailable. The range became her second home, though calling it a range was generous. It was a stretch of desert with targets at varying distances, wind flags that barely moved in the still air, and elevation changes that provided minimal challenge compared to Montana mountains. But it was where Iris could work, where she could refine skills that had grown rusty through 3 years of disuse. Other soldiers came to watch her shoot, drawn by curiosity and the stories that had grown larger with each retelling. She'd become something of a legend, the driver who wasn't really a driver, the hidden operator who'd saved 31 lives. The attention made her uncomfortable, but she was learning to channel it into something useful. Quinn became a constant presence, transitioning from gunner to sniper trainee with enthusiasm that bordered on obsessive. She absorbed Iris's teachings with fierce dedication, taking notes on wind reading and elevation calculations, practicing breathing techniques until they became automatic. During one afternoon session, as they lay prone behind rifles watching targets shimmer in heat waves, Quinn voiced the question others had been too afraid to ask. Do you regret it? Hiding for 3 years? All that time you could have been doing this? Iris adjusted her scope's parallax, considering her answer carefully. I don't know if regret is the right word. I made a choice based on who I thought I wanted to be. Turns out I was wrong about some things. Like what? Like thinking I could separate myself from my father's legacy by pretending to be ordinary, Iris said quietly. Like believing that serving quietly was somehow nobler than using the gifts I'd been given, like assuming that being invisible meant being free. Quinn nodded slowly, processing the admission. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're not invisible anymore. You're too good at this to waste it driving trucks. The words echoed others Iris had heard, but from Quinn they carried different weight. This wasn't about military hierarchy or chain of command. This was friendship, mentorship, the beginning of something that felt like purpose beyond survival. Brennan showed up at the range one morning, rifle in hand and pride set aside. He'd requested additional marksmanship training, acknowledging gaps in his skills that the ambush had exposed. Iris worked with him patiently, correcting his breathing and trigger control, teaching him the fundamentals her father had beaten into her bones. The dynamic between them had shifted completely, sergeant and corporal becoming teacher and student in ways that would have been impossible before the Serpent's Pass. I spent 3 years mocking you, Brennan said during a break between drills. 3 years treating you like you were nothing. And the whole time you could have destroyed me on any range, in any competition. Iris handed him ammunition for the next set. I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I was trying to serve without the weight of expectation. Did it work? No, she admitted with a slight smile. Turns out you can't hide who you are forever. Eventually, circumstances forced the truth out. The base's tactical operations began incorporating Iris into planning sessions, seeking her input on terrain analysis and potential threat assessment. Her warnings, once dismissed as driver paranoia, now carried authority that shaped mission parameters. She found herself briefing officers on sight lines and firing positions, marking maps with potential ambush locations, teaching combat soldiers to read terrain the way she'd been reading it since childhood. Holloway attended one of these briefings, listening as Iris explained how the geography of the region created natural choke points that insurgents could exploit. When she finished, he approached with an expression that mixed respect and residual discomfort. If I'd listened to you in the past, he said without preamble. If I'd taken your warnings seriously, Hartwell might still be alive. Iris had thought about this constantly, the weight of what-ifs that haunted every survivor. We can't know that, Lieutenant. We can only learn from what happened and do better next time. You try to tell us, Holloway insisted. Multiple times. And we shut you down because you were a driver. Because the system taught us that drivers don't have tactical insights worth hearing. The system is changing, Iris replied. You're here now, listening, learning. That's what matters. Velasquez became an unexpected ally, using his seniority and reputation to smooth Iris's transition into her new role. He'd been around long enough to understand military politics, how to navigate the complex social dynamics that govern life on base. Over coffee in the mess hall, he offered guidance that went beyond tactical training. People are going to test you, he said matter-of-factly. Some because they don't believe the stories. Others because they resent that you're getting recognition. You need to be ready for that. I've been tested before, Iris replied. 3 years of mockery prepared me pretty well. That was different, Velasquez said. That was them not seeing you. This is them seeing you too clearly and wanting to cut you down to size. You're Wade Thorne's daughter now, not just some anonymous driver. That comes with pressure. He was right. Iris felt the weight of her father's name more acutely now than ever before. Messages from him arrived regularly, mixing pride with advice, encouragement with warnings about the challenges of public recognition. He understood what she was experiencing because he'd lived it himself, the burden of being exceptional in a profession where excellence drew both admiration and resentment. The training continued, day after day, as Iris worked to regain the edge she'd dulled through disuse. Her skills had always been there, buried beneath anonymity, but bringing them fully back required dedication. She shot thousands of rounds, practiced in varying conditions, pushed herself to exceed the standards she'd once met effortlessly. And slowly, methodically, she felt herself becoming what she'd been trained to be. Other precision marksmen began arriving at the base, drawn by reports of Wade Thorne's daughter and curious about whether she lived up to the legend. Some were friendly, eager to learn and exchange techniques. Others were competitive, seeing her as a benchmark to exceed or discredit. Iris faced each interaction with the same steady patience her father had modeled, understanding that proving herself was now a permanent condition rather than a temporary challenge. During one evening, as the sun painted the desert in shades of amber and gold, Iris stood alone on the range, rifle at rest, looking out at the landscape she'd come to know so well. The past 3 years felt distant now, like a story about someone else. The driver who'd wanted anonymity. The soldier who'd hidden her gifts. The daughter who'd run from her father's shadow. She was none of those things anymore. Or maybe she was all of them, integrated into something more complete. Corporal Iris Thorne, precision marksman, teacher, operator, daughter of a legend, creating her own legacy one shot at a time. The visibility still felt uncomfortable. The attention still made her want to retreat into invisibility. But beneath that discomfort, she felt something else growing. Purpose. The sense that she was finally doing what she'd been meant to do all along. Using her gifts not for glory or recognition, but because they were needed. Because soldiers' lives depended on the skills she'd spent a lifetime developing. Because hiding had been the easy choice, and she was done with easy. The base loudspeaker crackled with the evening formation call, pulling Iris from her reflection. She collected her rifle, secured her equipment with practiced efficiency, and turned toward the operations building. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new soldiers to train, new missions to plan. But tonight, standing in the fading desert light, Iris Thorne felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. She felt like herself. 6 weeks after the ambush, Forward Operating Base Sentinel held a memorial service for the 4 soldiers who died in the Serpent's Pass. Iris stood in formation with the others, her new role as precision marksman firmly established, but the weight of that day still heavy on her shoulders. Hartwell's name was read alongside the 3 others, each syllable a reminder of what had been lost and what she'd fought to preserve. After the ceremony, as soldiers dispersed to their duties, Colonel Ashford called Iris to his office once more. She entered to find not just the colonel, but several other senior officers, their presence indicating something significant was happening. Maps covered the desk, tactical overlays showing terrain that looked disturbingly familiar. "We're planning another convoy through the Serpent's Pass," Ashford said without preamble. "Supply run to the northern firebase. Same route where you were ambushed." Iris felt her tactical mind engage immediately, analyzing the implications. They're testing whether the insurgents will try again, seeing if they've adjusted their tactics. "Exactly," Ashford confirmed. "And this time, we're not going in blind. You'll be embedded with the convoy as our primary counter-sniper asset. Your job is to identify and neutralize any ambush before it can develop." The responsibility settled over her like armor, heavy but necessary. She studied the maps, noting the terrain features she'd memorized during that terrible day, calculating new approaches and defensive positions. This wasn't just another mission. This was proof that the Army trusted her skills, that her role had transformed from anonymous driver to critical operational asset. "I'll need to position differently than standard convoy formation," Iris said, her finger tracing routes on the map. "Elevated overwatch, probably vehicle 3 or 4 for optimal sightlines. And I'll need Quinn as my spotter." "Done," Ashford said. "You have full authority to configure your tactical approach. This convoy succeeds or fails on your ability to read that valley better than the enemy." The mission launched 3 days later, 12 vehicles rolling out at dawn with Iris positioned exactly where she'd calculated. Quinn rode beside her, binoculars and range finder ready, their partnership refined through weeks of training. The convoy moved with heightened awareness. Soldiers who'd survived one ambush, now hyper-vigilant about repeating the experience. Brennan's voice came through the radio, stripped of its former arrogance. "All units, maintain spacing and stay sharp. Thorne, you see anything?" Iris scanned the ridgelines with eyes trained to catch details others missed. "Not yet, Sergeant, but we're approaching the danger zone. Everyone stay ready." The terrain closed around them as they entered the narrows, shadows lengthening across the road. Iris felt her combat awareness heighten, that state of focused attention where everything became data points in a continuous threat assessment. Wind direction, light angles, terrain features that offered concealment. The valley spoke to her in the language her father had taught, revealing its secrets to those who knew how to listen. There, Quinn said softly, her binoculars locked on a position 800 meters distant. Eastern Ridge, same general area as last time. Movement. Iris swung her scope to the coordinates, her breathing automatically settling into the rhythm of precision shooting. She saw what Quinn had spotted, a slight disturbance in the rocks that indicated human presence. Not yet a confirmed threat, but suspicious enough to warrant attention. Possible observer, she reported over the radio. Marking position for monitoring. The convoy continued forward, tension building with each meter. Iris tracked the suspicious position while scanning for others, knowing that ambushes rarely relied on single shooters. If insurgents were planning another attack, they'd have learned from their previous failure, adapted their tactics, positioned themselves differently. Second position, Quinn called out. Western Ridge, 900 meters. Definitely armed. Iris found the target, confirmed the weapon profile. This wasn't coincidence or innocent activity. This was deliberate positioning for an ambush. But unlike last time, they'd spotted it before the shooting started, before the convoy entered the kill zone, before soldiers died because warnings went unheeded. All units, this is Thorn, she said over the command channel, her voice carrying absolute certainty. We have confirmed hostile positions on both ridges. Recommend immediate halt and tactical reassessment. This time, no one questioned her. No one mocked the driver offering tactical insights. Holloway's response came immediately, decisive and trusting. All vehicles halt. Combat position. Thorn, you have authorization to engage at your discretion. The convoy stopped, soldiers moving to cover with practiced efficiency. Iris settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility and capability merging into focused purpose. She'd spent 3 years hiding these skills, 6 weeks reclaiming them. Now came the moment that would define whether her transformation was complete. Quinn fed her range and wind data with calm precision. Eastern target, 820 meters, wind 3 knots from the west. Iris made her adjustments, found her breathing rhythm, let the crosshairs settle on the distant figure who was just beginning to realize the convoy had stopped short of their planned ambush. Her finger found the trigger, took up the slack, pressed through the breakpoint with the confidence of 10,000 practice shots and 1 terrible day of combat. The rifle spoke. The insurgent fell. She shifted to the western target without pause. Quinn already feeding new data. 910 meters, quartering wind. Second shot. Second hit. The remaining insurgents broke and ran. Their ambush collapsed before it could begin. Iris tracked them through her scope, calculating whether they represented continued threat or defeated enemy. They disappeared over the ridge lines, choosing survival over combat, recognizing that the Americans had learned from experience and adapted. All clear, Iris reported. Threats neutralized or dispersed. The convoy resumed its journey, passing through the Serpent's Pass without further incident. Where 4 soldiers had died 6 weeks prior, now everyone lived because warnings were heeded and skills were trusted. The difference wasn't just tactical. It was cultural, a shift in how the Army viewed capability and who was authorized to possess it. Back at base, as the convoy secured and soldiers dispersed to their duties, Brennan approached Iris with an expression that mixed gratitude and something like wonder. "You just saved us again," he said simply. "May it look easy." "It wasn't easy," Iris replied. "It was preparation meeting opportunity. Same as anything else in this profession." Quinn joined them, grinning with the satisfaction of a successful mission. "We make a good team, Corporal. Your eyes, my calculations, and bullets going exactly where they need to go." Iris felt something warm spread through her chest, recognition that she'd found not just purpose, but partnership. These soldiers weren't mocking the driver anymore. They were respecting the operator, trusting the professional, valuing the team member who brought capabilities that kept them alive. That evening, Iris found herself at the range again, but this time she wasn't alone. A dozen soldiers had gathered, some seeking training, others simply wanting to watch her work. She'd become what she'd spent years avoiding, a teacher, a mentor, someone others looked to for guidance and skill development. As she demonstrated proper breathing technique to a young private who reminded her of herself at 18, Iris caught sight of her reflection in a nearby window. The same gray eyes looked back, but everything else had changed. The weight of hiding was gone, replaced by the lighter burden of authenticity. The fear of her father's shadow had transformed into pride in carrying forward his legacy. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who showed hidden strength when it mattered most. Quinn appeared at her shoulder as the sun set over the desert, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "You look different," she observed. Not physically, but like something inside shifted. Iris considered the words, recognizing their truth. "I spent 3 years trying to be someone I wasn't. Took a terrible day, and 31 lives on the line to show me that hiding gifts doesn't make you humble. It just makes you absent. And now I'm here," Iris said simply, fully present, using what I have to help others, training the next generation, being exactly who I was meant to be all along. The private she'd been teaching called out with a question about wind calculation. Iris turned to answer, her voice carrying across the range with the confidence of someone who'd finally accepted their purpose. Around her, soldiers listened and learned, no longer seeing a driver or even just a sniper, but something more complete. They saw Corporal Iris Thorne, daughter of a legend, creator of her own story, teacher and warrior, and proof that the greatest courage isn't in hiding who you are. The greatest courage is in revealing it, owning it, using it to make the world around you better and safer and more prepared for whatever comes next. As darkness fell over Forward Operating Base Sentinel, Iris remained at the range, rifle in hand, surrounded by soldiers who'd learned that exceptional doesn't mean different. It means dedicated. It means prepared. It means ready to step forward when the moment demands everything you've trained your entire life to give. And in that readiness, in that acceptance of gift and responsibility merged into purpose, Corporal Iris Thorne finally understood what her father had tried to teach her from the beginning. You don't choose your talents. You only choose what you do with them. And the choice to serve, to teach, to stand in the gap between danger and those who depend on you, that was the choice that mattered most. She was no longer just a driver. She never had been. And finally, that was okay.